Rick and Morty 2020 Issue 1. It's too bad it starts out with an ugly character I don't recognize talking. He says he wants a better world where mathematical order must flow, but isn't every universe run by math anyways? Why does he think C-137 doesn't have math as its master? Also, why is he saying C-137? It sure is awful generous of everybody to keep only referring to a dimension that the main character is living in as C-137, no matter how many times he changes universes just to humor him. You really shouldn't have the first page of a comic to be full of confusing writing. It's confusing enough that all the people working for this guy seem to be clones of Morty's teacher. I wonder if this guy's a version of him too. It's more compelling to have a new character look like the one you're familiar with instead of having a bad design. As I wonder how this guy could ever be so stupid as to plan on provoking Rick. I see some more weird pages. Some stick figure people are pulling a sled with stuff on it behind them while running ahead on nothing somehow. I guess they were running through a cosmic interstate because they end up going to a normal place with light behind them like it's a portal, and one of them goes to a cupboard with Rick and Morty's spare parts for these two to put on, and the parts are immediately functional. Which would only make sense if you assume these are robots that just conveniently look like humans. But I don't know why they've got extra eyes on their faces, and yet in the next panel they don't. And in the next panel, Morty doesn't have any stitches either. Like this is following a completely different Rick and Morty from them unprompted. At least the original Rick comic kept things simple and started out like a normal part of the show. Rick calls the narration bot, which makes me wish I saw said bot. It's too bad he interrupted it, because now I don't know for sure if it's taking place on Earth M616, or if these two just messed with it. It's an innovative story, but it's definitely less appealing than the previous comic so far. It starts out with something as esoteric as Rick saying they stole a rogue universe's science. First off, what could possibly make something a rogue universe? And second, how could you steal its science with science? I'm assuming they used the stolen witch's magical artifact to do it, because otherwise that's impossible. Rick says they have double science now and is baffled that Morty's planning to go to school when he should remember it's mandatory. He says he'll only be taught one fraction anyways. Rick wishes Morty would stay and considers making a meeseeks to watch him mess with science. And of course, the reason he hasn't already been doing that is that he likes Morty better. Rick opens the door and looks bored at an alien who somehow tracked him down, threatening him for bothering another dimension. The alien refers to his dimension with the word "the," even though the series keeps saying there's infinite universes, meaning there's infinite versions of his. But he must not know that. Also, how can an illustrated paperback cover dimension exist? It must be witchcraft related. It cuts ahead to the alien being beside him, threatened by Rick's devices, effortlessly keeping him under control. And Rick brags about the double science because he DNA'd a rat on its head. Why does he think he couldn't have done that before? If he can turn something into a pickle, he can turn the air above him into a rat. And somehow, all Mr. Goldenfold teaches Morty is one fraction that represents a half. But it is funny that he says, "And you better remember this fraction. It's going to be on the test." Rick runs into his classroom telling Morty to help him because he made a rat hydra, as I'm wondering why Rick hadn't successfully had it shot to death when he had ray guns pointing at him in his garage. Rick really has no reason to think Morty can help him. He's better off summoning a meeseeks to do it, because he's invincible. And Morty thinks Rick is embarrassing him in front of girls, when it's only Rick himself who's embarrassing by being in danger because he messed up. And his mess up is still awesome. All this is doing is telling the other students that he's awesome enough to survive Rick's adventures. Mr. Goldenfold reads a manga, and we see a huge amount of other versions of him reading purple books too, by coincidence. And a lot of them look different from each other, implying that somehow they all count as Mr. Goldenfolds as well, even though their DNA is different. Somehow that still resulted in a Mr. Goldenfold brain. Why are we being shown all this before they're relevant to the main characters? It's just off-putting. The Goldenfolds with the silly big hat tells Noelle they're about to land, and she's his niece, who sucks at math, and that's why her abusive mother had him bring her here. It's relatable that she barely likes herself and doesn't want to talk to this weird robot. He somehow expects us to believe that a pure infinite equation powers a ship with no need for engine or thrust, because the thing really powering it is witchcraft. Anyways, all she wanted to do was watch TV. She's shown the new graduate Goldenfolds, and one that's bad at math who they still found a job for who corrects everyone's bad handwriting. So these people find out that Rick's working with double the size and built his own 7 that does the work of 2 7s, because that makes total sense. It's not esoteric at all for a first issue. I assume the makers of this comic think you already read all the previous Rick comics. So this guy thinks he should make it his business that Rick did this for no reason. Why did the comic cut past showing us how the monster got killed? It didn't seem like Rick and Morty would be able to fight it. I just have to assume Rick defeated him with cybernetics that he only used because he wasn't able to run from him anymore. Why didn't he do that before going to Morty? A page is wasted before Morty tells Rick he embarrassed him in front of the class and says he needs a second away from the chaos so that he can be a kid. Rick says they're free to do whatever they want and somehow asks what he wants school for when he just told him. Plus he needs to complete school to get a job to get a daily break from him after school is done. Morty naturally asks Rick what the Council Ricks was stopping him from doing before because he was already doing whatever he wanted. He expects me to believe the Council was preventing him from making his dream shake with space sugar. Sugar would only be produced in space if either it got generated from wizardry, or it had people on a satellite or spaceship make it. And that's not really in space. That's satellite or spaceship sugar. The Hat Goldenfold approaches them as they're bickering, waiting for a good opportunity to talk to them. Morty expects me to believe they had to go to a butt plant to get him a new butt, when obviously Rick could have just had him regrow his perfectly fine. Because not only did he master cloning, but he had his hand to regrow. Rick naturally points out that he's saving Morty from a lifetime being a servant to order. He is giving him excitement and unpredictability, but he's forgetting that not everyone's like him enough to appreciate that, and that his adventures are way too stressful. The Hat Goldenfold threatens Rick and tells him he's not the dominant variant anymore, with no evidence. Morty apologizes to Rick, who snaps a pencil, and we see a rat in his hand become a rat sword. But Goldenfold's scepter conveniently turns into a sword without explanation as he brags about math. Rick says something to make Morty turn into a living missile for nothing. Rick tells Morty to pull his earlobe to make his limbs come together and reminds him they've done Missile Morty before, which he didn't know. So he must have made him forget that because he couldn't handle it. It's nice of Noelle to pull his earlobe to bring him back together. I really hated how Morty looked there. Morty tells her that Rick needs to be taken down a notch. She says her uncle's always messing up her day, doing stuff like taking her to another universe to kill a Minus Hydra. If you get rid of its head, it loses another head. I'm finally seeing the result of the central finite curve getting broken by seeing a person from a universe where Rick isn't the smartest man there. This is the kind of thing I expected to see in Season 6. Morty references that he was used as a human puppet, and the whole time I'm just waiting for Morty to embarrass himself in front of her and get her tired of him. But I'm guessing he's going to get her off-put in the most predictable way possible, with his pervertedness. She admits that the multiverse isn't that bad, and he says maybe it's best when you find the right person to explore it with. As we see Rick fighting in boring black and white, holding a fire-breathing fish I guess he got from his lab coat. Sending out eye lasers and getting hit by a giant number. I guess the giant numbers are robots. Rick pulls Morty into the portal for a retreat because his enemies are too strong and there's too many of them, even though Morty wasn't in danger. Hat Goldenfold gets mad at Noelle, saying that she let them retreat and couldn't stop them. Then the normal Goldenfold gets told what we already figured out. And surprisingly, he's free of morality enough to want to come along with him, even though his goal is to kill Rick and ruin this reality. He's not allowed to come with him and called a buffoon, even though, while he comes off like one, he's still at least a math teacher. Besides, he got a stupid Goldenfold to correct people's handwriting, so now I have to assume that was the only job that an idiot could do on his spaceship. They walk away from him, and Noelle thinks Hat Goldenfold conquered this world, even though he didn't replace the President of America or spend a long time getting to replace every other president. Because she's only telling him this to humor him, so he'll stop. I guess I'm saying our and we really isn't sweet because he's ignoring the fact that she wants no part of this by doing this. But from his perspective it's sweet because he doesn't have to include her like he's attached to her when she does nothing. He says they know an equation to make a planet of math with no pain where everything makes sense. Without a witch's spell, how could there not be any pain? Morphine would kill someone if it was used on them too frequently. So it can't be a planet with a constant supply of that for everyone. It'd only work if it was a planet where everyone was a robot free of pain. Why does he want a dash of bird person multiverse and some Mr. Nimbus? He doesn't need an entire planet, he could just send himself to the simulation he made. Morty wants to go back through the portal and get Noel's number, and Rick knows he's bad at dates. Well, he hasn't seen him on one, he just assumes. He still kept 2 different girlfriends for a long time. Rick somehow believes that all the smart Ricks died in the Citadel of Ricks. He has no excuse for believing that, because if there's infinite universes where Rick's the smartest man in them, then there'd be an infinite amount of smartest Ricks. So they couldn't all fit in the Citadel, which didn't look crowded at all. And it'd take an infinite amount of time for evil Morty to kill all of them with rerouting to Operation Phoenix. And of course he didn't even take a day carrying that out. Not all of them would have had Operation Phoenixes. Rick in the show thought he axed that program, and it's not confirmed that he got it working again after Season 4, and there'd be infinite Ricks like that. And why does he think that a team of normal Ricks would be remotely useful? First off, he'll run out of portal fluid pretty quickly trying to make that team. Maybe he plans to steal portal fluid from the garage of the smartest man in the universe in the other universe every time he runs out. But it'd be better to have a robot army because robots are tougher and more capable. And while I get that he might not have a robot factory or nanobots that can make more themselves already made, and it'd be much faster to just recruit people than make that, and it takes him hours to just make a clone, he can have something automatically made in a dimension with faster time speed relative to him, so that a second later he can get the technology made, fully done, retrieved by a drone, or by moving a tractor beam from his spaceship. Then he could have thousands of armies made from him in seconds. I'm sure he did that to make the universe of the microverse battery age fast enough that it would get to a point where it had a civilization on its planet. Sure, it's a shame that a genius didn't think of that, and instead, because he feels time pressured, he's making a plan that's just gonna get innocent normal Ricks killed, which is almost as bad as what Prime Rick did to him when he wanted to be normal. I guess he wants to overwhelm this guy with sheer numbers, but because he's got an ego, he wants to recruit other versions of himself in particular. I think it's because he trusts Ricks to be competent even when they're normal, so he wouldn't trust an army of Jerrys, and he wouldn't be able to stand being around them. He trusts normal Ricks more than normal other people because they're still geniuses. The story ends with us seeing a math teacher Rick on a lead-in page to the next issue. I hope it's being metaphorical when he says the frog could weigh anything in a science class because he'd know it couldn't weigh 1 or 2 pounds. And he's just trying to make science class seem more fun and whimsical. Rick and Morty 2020 Issue 2. Rick talks way too much explaining that there's other Ricks to math teacher Rick at the park. So that's a really boring page. And he thinks he isn't a genius. Then why does he even turn to him instead of random people around him? Rick explains that Hack Goldenfold's trying to take over the Earth, even though I thought he was just planning to make a new planet entirely. I don't think he ever told him that. It's nice that Rick tells him he's fine. The other universe tries to be a little interesting because there's dog bees here. Never mind, it's only because of Hack Goldenfold. Morty asks if Rick's gonna make an army of mid-Ricks, only for Rick to suddenly say he's not gonna do that, when he clearly planned on it last issue. He just wants Morty to take him to the Goldenfold dimension, disguise him as him so that he can get killed. Naturally, Morty tells him that's sick. It'd be better to make a clone Rick for that, using a dimension with faster time to get it done instantly if time is his excuse. Why don't either of them think of that? Why doesn't he go to a lame idiot Rick for this instead of wasting a fine Rick? Math teacher Rick says he's Noel's teacher, and Rick tells Morty to go bond with his new crush, and tells Math Rick he's got an army to make that'll keep him safe. Did he change his plan? Just because he huddled with Morty doesn't mean that his plan to kill him wouldn't be heard by this guy. They should have had whispering text bubbles. Even then it shouldn't matter because Morty would have still yelled when he told him that's sick and that he's like a baby, even if that wouldn't tell him he plans to get him killed. Rick tries to make me think he's math teacher Rick without having his outfit on. Of course, they don't question his lab coat because they think he's insignificant. And maybe they don't even know what math teacher Rick is supposed to look like. And Morty and math teacher get portaled to Morty's house, where he sees a giant machine towering over the neighborhood behind him. And for some reason he assumes it's draining the earth, even though it doesn't sound like it's drilling. And it's just expending energy by making that light. The only thing math teacher is interested in, because he's used to this, is Jerry's Legos. Morty agrees to let him come in because he needs to hide him. I hate that Beth says he bought Legos instead of paying the mortgage. Why doesn't she pay the mortgage? She's the one who works. It turns out, of course, the worst Golden Fold really is draining the earth. And it turns out he's against humanity and is getting people killed. And like most Ricks, there's no backstory to explain why, so he's just a cardboard cutout of a villain. I don't even know why he's draining the earth, so it's not even memorable. So Hat Goldenfold gets called out on by his niece for bringing her here. He says he's not treating these people like they're nothing, even though he's clearly killing them, so he thinks she'll buy anything he says. He says he wants to build them a better world, and she tells him to do it then, and then tells him to take the president to the Numbleverse. Why would taking the president there make the world better? He's not gonna make the world like that. He won't have enough power to anyways because of Congress. So he agrees to portal the president to the Numbleverse where he sees a square-head bird. I don't see the benefit in this. He was just planning to bomb the Goldenfolds. At least he was planning to take action against them like a hero. Meanwhile, the real Goldenfold wastes time with how he talks to his students about something other than math. He somehow thinks they think his job is a party. There's no way a mugger wouldn't kill him purely because he thinks he bums him out, because he wouldn't know anything about him based on just looking at him. I highly doubt ugliness is a factor in a mugger doing that. They'd be used to that. How advanced are the world's doctors that they can remove his dad's skeleton? I guess it's good to know people apparently stole Rick's medical technology, so people are actually getting to benefit from it. He tells the students to write down that life is long and lonely because he was rejected by 100 other hems. Why does he assume it's 100? Why did he even assume it was a bunch of other hems when he only saw one? Anyways, he's so self-centered that when his students die, he says they've got to listen to him first. And somehow he was keeping melted ice cream in his desk. I think the writers of Rick and Morty find it so boring to write about school that they have to make a completely unrealistic, unlikable teacher just to stand it. But it's just annoying. I'd rather have barely any time wasted with the school at all then. They can do better stuff for padding than have a teacher who never would have been hired. There's so many kids' series out there, you're telling me that this is the only way to make a teacher interesting? The president's fascinated at seeing that just one fruit can sustain up to 3 families for over a month. Then he's shown an infinipede. That makes me wonder why it doesn't just eat itself to death in seconds. He should say it's got really fast healing powers, because it's an alien. He somehow thinks he can convince the president to let them stay here when he reminds him of the fact that he's killing a lot of people because somehow they need to do that. The president just wants to kidnap that infinipede. Why is he talking to him like he's remotely a threat at all to this all-powerful mad scientist? As if he has any choice but to agree to his demand. So Goldenfold finds out his niece portaled away, and the president hits him with a cube rock. Only witchcraft would cause perfectly cube and triangular rocks to be common in nature. This whole place is obviously made by a witch, or at the very least it's a place that witches could evolve at, because of how much magic is there. The president tries to defeat him, somehow revealing that plenty of people have tried to abandon him in a math wonderland before. I guess he's just making stuff up. They get threatened by a giant alien, and we see Beth talking to math teacher Rick, with the family getting along with him. Even though she's not his Beth, he feels proud of her as if she was. It's actually Morty's family. It seems like Beth's lying at the end because that doesn't make any sense. Morty goes to the garage and eventually gets startled by Noelle showing up in an intimidating science way, which I assume was the only way she could get here. She asks him to go on a date with her in a great dimension with 2 sunsets and a magic pizza rock. He thanks her and agrees. He doesn't know what job he'd like to have later, so it makes sense that he'd agree to go with her when she thinks they could get trapped together forever. Because he's hoping she's just like him, so of course they'd be compatible. Rick wheels over to Math Rick's family and finds out that in his universe, Jerry's muscular, Beth's a surgeon, and despite Morty being dressed like a punk, he's a happy kid who's comfortable on the phone, and there's a bunch of surgeon trophies behind him, including a horse surgeon trophy. How did Beth change from being a horse surgeon to a normal surgeon? Why would she downgrade if apparently everyone thinks that it's a downgrade compared to being a surgeon? It'd take an eternity of going to medical school again. How is there a not the dumbest kid in class trophy? Rick's self-loathing enough to assume the family's only successful because he's different in this place. Moments like these are what makes me like him. He hears Morty tell his grandma Diana he loves her, so he can hear him just fine. He decides to go to Diane and Rick's house. It sure is a miracle that he can produce a working key from his finger even though every single lock is different and he won't know what the lock is like. I guess it's a lockpick, not a key. Or the lock uses nanobots that figures out what the lock is like for him, so it'll figure out how to shape itself. Rick walks through the house looking depressed at how much better his life could have been. It turns out the house is dark because Diane's just getting home. I really wish I got to know what job she had. I didn't need to see an entire page wasted on vague memories of her. I already got that looking at her would bring back memories. Why was Rick having a presentation to an audience that multiversal bombs will never screw us up? They wouldn't approve of those. And of course, if they were possible, they would have already been set off. Rick sits down with his hands on his face and naturally decides to make a team of extremely bad Ricks. He keeps looking sad as he makes a portal and jumps into it to avoid facing her again, since it's too hard on him to see her when she died because of his decision to stay with a different version of her. A different person would stay here, but he has to know that she'd know he's not like him and hate the new him. So there really is no point in trying to do that. So we see a montage of Rick's getting other Ricks to be a part of his army just by asking, even though he outright tells them they'll die. It's nice to see Rick's being different from how I'm used to in so many different ways, but I'm wondering how they can be so suicidally self-destructive as to go along with him without being brainwashed. Are they that bored of their jobs? Rick said he'd make an army. This isn't making them. So another page shows us having an insultingly easy time recruiting Ricks because they're just that bored of being wage slaves. One of them even says that's why. It's almost laugh out loud hilarious how easy it is for Rick to get an army of hims to help. With Sonic I can understand them all wanting to be brave heroes. Meanwhile, Morty gets wined and dined at a picnic on another world. He says he never gets to enjoy the moment with a person. He says she's fun, and they kiss. Sadly, their moment's immediately interrupted by Goldenfold flying over to them with reins in the mouth of that dragon. She gets insulted for leaving him and says she knew he'd survive. She apologizes to the president, has forced dialogue when Morty gets grabbed, and Goldenfold says that with Morty with him, he can lure Rick to him. Rick flies out of a portal with a flying suit on, with an army of Ricks with bat wings behind him. I guess Rick knew to come here right away because he has a tracking device in Morty. Why does Goldenfold think this is the main Rick? He tells the Goldenfolds to drop a portal to it and bring the Goldenfolds that can fly with the best wings, while Noelle tells Morty that now is their chance to run. Meanwhile, math teacher Rick asks the real Goldenfold what's wrong and calls him pal. I'm relieved that it was realistic and he does know that Rick sent him here to get killed, instead of him having selective hearing, even if it is a shame for him. Math teacher Rick says the Goldenfolds aren't worth his time and that main Rick's family is just miserable and that the smart Goldenfolds aren't smarter than them. They just think they're smarter because they're so capable. They're more talented, but if they were really smarter than them, their lives wouldn't be so sad, because they'd be better at making themselves happy. He says they push their specialness by kicking people around, and they're better off not being involved in the fight above them. If he doesn't take his advice, the scene's just going to be pointless. So this issue by Alex Firer is about a version of Mr. Goldenfold who's the smartest man in his universe invading Rick's world to fight him because he hates him for a flimsy reason considering that he acts just like him and is the equivalent to him role-wise. He hates how chaotic he is and emphasizes that math is order, but the fact that he's always dimension hopping at complete random for crazy adventures for no reason makes him just as chaotic as him. So he's Rick without self-awareness, or being a drunk. So he's boring, complete with his constant raving about math. It's like he's trying to convince himself, because it should have gotten bored then after the first time. The biggest problem with the story is that until Mr. Goldenfold meets Rick, it's just boring. It's so awesome that the comic finally showed us what it'd be like if someone other than Rick was the smartest. It's about time. Even if it doesn't require that much creativity, as it just feels like a discount Rick anyways. It was very tedious in execution. The first page fails for getting you invested and excited in this new comic series because it's not about Rick and Morty, and instead wastes our time with a villain scene that doesn't establish anything and could have been cut out just fine. And it's insulting that it isn't explained how Rick stole a universe's science to make double science and become more competent when only witchcraft could do that. And while that doesn't matter to the plot overall, on the first read you won't know that and be off-put that something as confusing as that could be the premise for a first issue, when it isn't. Overall, these things don't matter to the plot, but they seem like they would matter, only for it to turn out that the first issue is the start of a story arc. I guess the only reason I like it is that it introduces the genius Goldenfold idea, and Noelle. This issue by Alex F. is about Rick and math teacher Rick switching dimensions and finding out that math Rick has a happier family, because a more well-adjusted Beth was a better mother, resulting in kids with good self-esteem. Though that doesn't explain why Jerry had the motivation to do all that exercise. Rick finds it too depressing that Diane's still alive and can't bring himself to face her, so he makes the decision he should have thought of from the start, though it wasn't worth it to see Math Rick, and decides to recruit Bad Ricks for a flying army. I guess he used nanobots to make the bat wings and mech suits so quickly. But then he could have just made a robot army and avoided recruiting innocent people and sending them to their deaths for no reason. At least Morty got to have a good time with Noelle for a little while. But it's too bad it wasn't told it was for hours, and instead it feels like it was just a minute. It's just great to see him in love with someone that he's actually compatible with and has a chance with. With Jessica, his life would only corrupt hers because of Rick, but I'm guessing Noelle's gonna be a one little arc character and that's it. It would be fine to have Morty reference that he's still dating her while the exciting sci-fi plot could keep going on, because Sonic Boom did that with Tails. Like the previous issue, this wasn't bad, and this was definitely better than the previous issue. The Goldenfold subplot may have been a villain scene, but at least it was interesting.